A lot of people are trying to figure out what President Trump is going to do next in the conflict with the Islamic Republic in Iran. If you look at all of the options that President Trump has and how he uses them, it's interesting to see that it actually matches exactly all of the sorts of power and forces that the Islamic Republic has. And I'm going to show you how switching between them is actually the best strategy. And that's exactly what President Trump has been doing so far. If you look at the options President Trump has against the Islamic Republic, we have military operations, we have the blockade of the Iranian ports, and we have negotiations and ceasefire. And all of these are weapons, including the negotiations. A lot of people are treating the negotiations and the so-called ceasefire as de-escalation against the Islamic Republic, but I think those have caused the most damage and the greatest hits against the Islamic Republic. So if you look at all three of these weapons that President Trump has, the military action in the form of bombardments, and the blockade is also military action, but it's a different kind. A better way to categorize it is bombardments, the naval blockade, and negotiations. It actually matches exactly what I usually describe as the three sources of political power, which is military, economics, and people power. These three are always, for every country, their sources of political power. Your military, your economics, and the amount of support that you have among certain people. When it comes to the Islamic Republic, the people power is the minority support it has among Iranian people, let's say, for example, 5%, and it's crucial for the Islamic Republic to keep that. That power from the Islamic Republic comes from its Islamic revolutionary narrative. Their ideology is the source of their people power. If you look at what President Trump has been doing, he has very effectively targeted all of these three, and he has switched between them, which makes them all more effective. So Operation Epic Fury was obviously damaging the Islamic Republic's military capability, destroying a lot of its missiles, a lot of its launchers, most of its air defense, most of its navy, most of its air force. The naval blockade of Iranian ports is now targeting the Islamic Republic's financial, its economic power, which seems to be more devastating to the Islamic Republic than the bombardments. Taking out some of the key infrastructure that the IRGC also uses to operate its war machine will serve as weakening both the military capability of the Islamic Republic, and it also limits the Islamic Republic's ability to fund its war machine. But the reason why I see the negotiations as also a weapon is because, as I mentioned to you before, that has challenged the ideological power of the Islamic Republic, which means that it reduces its people power because it reduces the Islamic Republic's popularity among its own base, among the minority of the Iranians who continue to support it. Because speaking with the Americans means that you're shaking the hands of the people who killed the supreme leader. Capitulating in any sense means that you're betraying the ideals of the Islamic Revolution. If you look at all of the terms that both sides have, there's different levels of influence on how the pro-regime Iranians view you, depending on which one of the terms you're giving up on. If you go from the least important to the most important, I think one of the lowest ones will be selling out Hezbollah, which, given how angry some regime supporters seem to have been because of any suggestion of Hezbollah or even the Houthis not being considered in the negotiations, shows that even the least sensitive, most flexible parts of the terms are still a red line for many regime supporters. Let's say that's the bottom of the list. Going higher, if the Islamic Republic signs any agreement or even suggests that they're about to sign any agreement that limits their ability to support their proxies, if they agree to open the Strait of Hormuz, that's going to make many regime supporters angry. And then higher in priority and even more sensitive for regime supporters will be the range of the missiles. But the highest of our priority and the most sensitive and the greatest red line for regime supporters, and the thing that the regime has always been the most insistent on never giving up on and never capitulating, is the enrichment of uranium and keeping the enriched uranium that they already have. If they ever give up on that, it is not just a sign of a short-term defeat, that is a sign of a full surrender to regime supporters and betraying Islam as a whole, betraying the Islamic Revolution, and betraying the blood of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. It would be the most unforgivable crime, and anybody responsible for it will be considered a traitor. The action will be seen as treasonous, and the people responsible for it will be seen as Zionist spies. Zionist spies who, from their perspective, could see that the Islamic Republic is winning against the Americans and Israelis from their perspective, and they infiltrated the regime from the inside, brought about a ceasefire so that they could take away all the achievements of IRGC, the soldiers, and the martyrs. The perspective of some regime supporters is that it's the military forces that do a good job and that they help the Islamic Republic win in the battlefield, but it's the diplomat that keep betraying them, either on purpose because they're traitors or because they just suck at diplomacy. And they think within the battlefield, everything that our fighters, our soldiers achieve against the enemies, when it comes to the diplomacy, when it comes to negotiations at the negotiating table, that our diplomats keep losing everything that they have gained in the battlefield. Not all regime supporters believe that. The regime propaganda, especially from the state TV, manages to convince some regime supporters that these are two different arenas of battle and the soldiers are effectively fighting in the battlefields and the diplomats are very effectively winning in diplomacy at the negotiating table. The regime has to really sell that argument that the diplomats are as effective as the soldiers and the diplomacy is just war by other means. But it's really challenging for them to sell that idea to regime supporters, not just because they keep going back and do the things that they said they never do, for example, opening the Strait of Hormuz even for just 2 days, but also because there are many other people within the regime who call them out on their hypocrisy. Internally, when different people within the regime are calling each other out, people observe that and they could see that something is wrong here. Going back to President Trump, a lot of people were disappointed when he stopped the military operations and he brought the Islamic Republic to the negotiating table. But President Trump was successful in causing so much division within the Islamic Republic by doing that. Within regime supporters, there was a lot of unity over the war and responding to the Americans and Israelis, but the negotiating table and the ceasefire has divided them. When I say they got united, I'm not talking about a unity among the Iranian people. The vast majority of the Iranian people are against the regime. I'm talking about unity among, let's say, 5% of regime supporters. Many Western commentators come up with this ridiculous suggestion that the war has had a rally around the flag effect among the Iranian people. It has done no such thing. The vast majority of the Iranian people will never back the Islamic Republic. It's a very ridiculous suggestion, especially after what happened in early January and the massacre that the Islamic Republic did on the Iranian people, to suggest the same people are not going to support the Islamic Republic because of the Americans and Israelis attacking the Islamic Republic, which most Iranian people don't see it as an attack on them, but an attack on the Islamic Republic. To suggest that the Iranian people who have been oppressed by the regime for 47 years are now going to support the Islamic Republic because of these military operations is absolutely ridiculous. And anybody suggesting that should not be taken seriously. We're talking about the regime supporters only, the minority of the regime supporters. The war has caused a lot of unity among them until President Trump forced them to come to the negotiating table. It was very encouraging for me to see the division between the regime supporters and how successful this plan was. I spend a lot of time following accounts by regime supporters and consuming their content. I could see the moment that happened. First, it was when they realized that Ghalibaf is going to Islamabad to meet with the Americans. That was devastating to a lot of regime supporters. But then when Araghchi announced that the Strait of Hormuz is open, that escalated everything and increased the civil war among the regime supporters. Going back to the 3 weapons that President Trump has: military operations for reducing the military power of the Islamic Republic, the blockade to reduce the economic power of the Islamic Republic, and negotiations to cause division and challenge the ideological power, the people power of the Islamic Republic. The best way to do this is to keep switching between them, because once you bring the Islamic Republic to the negotiating table, you have already caused a lot of distrust and division between the regime supporters. So you don't need to continue doing that. You could now go back to focusing on the blockade and the military operations if you want to, because even stopping the negotiation is not going to undo the harm that you did to the Islamic Republic when it comes to the narrative. Not only that, in fact, it increases it, because the regime supporters will call out the regime officials that decided to talk to the Americans by saying, see, you went to the table and you talked to them and you achieved nothing. They bombarded you anyways. Why do you keep falling for these tricks by President Trump? Every time you trust him and you talk to him, he backstabs you again and he attacks you again. You should have never talked to him anyways. You should have continued the fight. You should have continued the war. Switching from the negotiations to the war strategy increases the impact of the division that you caused because of the negotiation. And after you bombard them and continue the blockade to the point that they tap out and want to talk to you again, and then you bring them back to the negotiating table again once more, then the regime supporters are going to lose their mind and get so angry at the regime for why they keep falling for this trick by President Trump over and over again. When it comes to the negotiating table itself and the terms from both sides, the most inflexible part for both sides and the biggest red line for both sides is the enriched uranium. Many Iranians are worried that what if the Islamic Republic bends the knee and also agrees to give up on enriching uranium with no time limits, with no sunset clause, with even American observers coming to Iran to guarantee that the Islamic Republic is never going to enrich uranium ever again, destroy all of their enriching uranium facilities, and stay there to always make sure that this never happens again. What if the Islamic Republic agrees to even that, the most important red line, the one that they're least flexible about? What if they even give that up to President Trump, given they're so desperate now with the naval blockade? And then President Trump basically gets everything he wants that will stop the military operations, that could stop the naval blockade, and the Islamic Republic gets to continue living because President Trump basically got everything he wanted from them. Putting aside how difficult it is for the Islamic Republic to give up on all of that, given that will make the regime supporters turn against the regime. Let's imagine that somehow the Islamic Republic figures out how to do that. What I keep telling Iranian people who are worried about this is that given the level of damage to the Islamic Republic standing among its own people and the lack of legitimacy that it will have, if it does that, given how after that there will be close to 0% support for the regime if they do anything like that, then denuclearization of the Islamic Republic is just another way to end the Islamic Republic, because that will cause such an unstable situation for the Islamic Republic that eventually, through denuclearization of the Islamic Republic, we are going to get the full destruction of the Islamic Republic. The way I see it is that there's two ways to go about doing this. Either if the goal is to denuclearize the Islamic Republic, and if they don't submit, if they don't bend the knee, if they don't give up their nuclear ambitions, then you destroy them to the point that there is no more Islamic Republic, and then you denuclearize them, or you denuclearize them because they bent the knee and they submitted, and you get destruction of the Islamic Republic because you denuclearize them. So it's basically either denuclearization through destruction or destruction by denuclearization. Come talk to me about this and other topics and ask me questions in our discussion group. The link is below. Let me know in the comments if this was helpful. Comments that tell me that this is educational or that they learned something or that they enjoyed the content. It really motivates me to make more videos like this. My name is Armin Navabi. I'm Israel Chai. Long live America. Javisha. Payandeiran.